All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, everybody, to HBAP Startups. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are new to the Startups group, we have a few announcements at the beginning of each meeting. We do some short networking breakout rooms, one-on-one, and then we'll come back together for our main event. And first off is our mission. We're here to help foster an innovation and entrepreneur community coming out of HBAP. And our goal is to provide our members with the tools, knowledge, leadership, and confidence necessary to create and grow their businesses from the ground up. For those of you who are HBAP students, we have an internal website, community calendar, and Slack channel. So you'll have access to that. For those of you who are not HBAPers, here I'm going to put this link into the Zoom chat. Here's how to apply to the Harvard Business Analytics program. I'm 95% confident that there's a small probability that you'll get in. And then for everyone else, here's a link to our newsletter. Please click this link, sign up for our newsletter, and we will newsletter you. Also, please bring a guest. Feel free to invite more people. We are definitely trying to grow the community. Susan.
Yes, and welcome the guests that we have, because we do have some tonight. We do. Which is very exciting. So just wanted to quickly review and refresh our code of conduct. So in keeping with our mission, we want to create this collaborative space for our community where we can explore ideas and hear people talk about their ideas and get feedback in an environment of trust and confidentiality. So in that light, the speaker has all rights reserved unless they tell us otherwise. And then just a reminder about Francis Fry's really excellent 5-to-1 ratio of giving feedback. For every piece of feedback that might feel a little sharp, we want to give 5 pieces of feedback that are positive and uplifting. And then if anybody has any concerns about confidentiality or conflicts of interest, just reach out to Todd and me and we'll help you figure it out. Thanks.
All right. Real quickly, I noticed that we have a new face, Manav. 10 seconds. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? How did you hear about us? And what is your superpower? And I'm cold calling on you.
All right. 10 seconds. My name is Manav. Did I already crash? Oh, okay.
You're good.
Okay. My name is Manav Majumdar. I'm a rising junior at UNC Charlotte, and I'm studying business analytics and computer science, doing a double major so I can get into that data field. But I'm here from Maine, and what I do, starting my own business. I'm starting an online web commerce store where I sell cyberpunk decor and home apparel and decor. And how did you hear about us? Heard from Maine. And my superpower would be telekinesis. I think it's really cool of moving objects with your mind, but really not doing anything with your hands.
Okay, telekinesis. We're going to hold on to that, and we're going to come back to that later. All right, thank you. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. Quickly, announcements. Upcoming next week is the Testing Business Ideas Workshop number 2. Jeremy, Susan, Satya, and I will be hosting that. Excuse me while I cough. And then August 3rd is our monthly HBAP social. So startups will not be meeting on the first Wednesdays of every month. All right, so now let's do some breakout rooms. Let me bear with me while I figure this out. I have to create them. Takes me a couple seconds to do it. Let me see if I can figure this out. All right. I will see you guys in about 6 minutes, and I'll see you soon. I'll be here. Pause recording. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fun in your breakout rooms. Just announcement. We will have a little poll at the very end. I know, Roland, you want to have a few minutes at the very end. You can do that. And then we'll hang out for some overtime. Now, Without further ado, I would like to introduce everyone to Sedale Turbovsky. Sedale is the CEO and co-founder of Open Grants. Open Grants is a venture-backed startup focusing on building modern infrastructure for grant funding. Prior to Open Grants, Sedale served as the CEO of Carbon Blue, a venture and grant-backed SaaS startup solving challenges in fleet management. Sedale led the company through an MVP and helped secure a healthy pipeline of government contracts. During that time, he gained intimate knowledge of the challenges and pitfalls of applying for and managing grant funding as a technology startup. And that was the impetus for Open Grants. Having worked directly with Open Grants' current strategic partner, Momentum, developing multiple successful grant applications, Sedale is highly experienced in independent grant writing and public-private partnerships. He is also well-versed in working across cultures and environments with over 5 years' experience as a consultant in Argentina and Chile. Sedale brings with him a history of leading successful teams, experience and deep connections to the public sector, and a passion for building companies with a strong social mission. Some of his superpowers include fundraising, team building, no-code wizardry, okay, I really like you now, and the ability to run on less sleep than most other humans. He's the founding fellow of the On Deck Climate Tech Fellowship and an ardent advocate for economic empowerment and innovation as economic development. He is married to a rock star human being named Allison Turbovsky, and together they have 2 boys. Now, if everyone could please briefly unmute yourselves, and let's give a warm welcome to Sedale Turbovsky. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Let me stop sharing. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. That was quite the rousing introduction. I appreciate it. Yeah, super excited to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. I was just on a great one-on-one and mentioning that one of the things that was particularly exciting about being in that space as a consultant, we managed, so with Momentum, managed about $5 billion in grant-funded projects around the world. And so it was a lot of work, of course, not just me, but myself and the team. And I got very enamored with grant funding because it was so altruistic, doesn't require any kind of payback. It was focused on creating impacts and changes in the world. And it was also equally, as much as I love it, it's also just massively frustrating and hard and difficult to deal with, and really lacked the kind of utility that you find in private markets and capital in the private market. So that was the vision and mission with Open Grants. So I'm excited to share a little bit about Open Grants tonight, as well as dive into kind of the process of being super successful in the grant funding space. One of the big things that really set our company and our team apart, and continues to set my team apart from maybe anyone else in the area, is just having this incredibly a 99.9% success rate applying for funding, which sounds impressive, but it actually isn't. It's just a function of not writing losing grants, which is actually a lot easier than it sounds. So I'm excited to share all that. Definitely want to open it up towards the end for questions and some discussion. But I'm going to go ahead and dive in and just talk a bit about the grant funding space and Open Grants in particular. And so I will pull up this short slide deck. I promise it won't be long. And I'll dive right in. So actually, first, I'll just give you a quick look at Open Grants. So one of the things that we wanted to do with Open Grants was make grant funding transparent and accessible to people. And to start with, that just means do you know that you're eligible for grant funding or not? And how can you figure that out in 5 minutes or less? And so that was the vision with Open Grants. And I'm excited to say that we've cracked a lot of that code with this platform, which is to say that this is, for the United States in particular, this is the single most comprehensive data set of grant funding that exists. And it also allows you to create a profile as a user, and then you can get connected to grant funding instead of having to go through a big searching process. So that's something that takes place right here on the platform. I won't walk you through the whole thing. It's free to sign up and check it out. And that's another kind of core tenet of our approach to the market and approach to the space is hey, a lot of this is like your tax dollars, so it should be something that you can access and take advantage of. So I'll just show you real quickly. The reason that we've aggregated all this information is because there's a lot of it, and it lives all over the internet in a bunch of different ways. And so you can search, you can filter, you can drill down, start to understand a bit more about what kind of funding you might be eligible for, and you can post out projects to our community. And this is the other part of the platform that's super clutch, is you can post out projects to our community. And we have over 280 different firms and experts on the platform who are there to provide technical assistance. Some of them, in fact, are funded by the government. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't know necessarily is that, all these grant programs that are out there, and in 2019, it was $750 billion in grant funding. So this is a pretty significant seed fund that the US government operates. And that's just the federal government. That doesn't take into account all the foundations and other groups and state grant programs. So you're looking at $750 billion plus of opportunities here, 181 billion specifically for small businesses and startups. And so there's an incredible resource here, and it's sprawling and hard to navigate. And so you can navigate it all here. And then when you actually do loop in or connect in with that program that is interesting to you, you typically need someone like a consultant like myself and the team to help you walk through that process. You're 3 times more likely to be successful securing funding working with a consultant in the space. It doesn't have to be someone that we suggest, but what we've done is gone ahead and curated all those resources right here in the platform. So that's Open Grants in a nutshell. It's a grant search engine and expert marketplace of folks that you can engage with. You can have conversations for free, of course. And then if you do decide to work with them, you can transact and manage all of that here on the platform. So that's what Open Grants does. And it really is a project that we are looking forward to continuing to roll out. We have some stuff in the works with the Department of Commerce as well as HUD. And we're very excited about where things are headed, because the vision for this is similar to the SBDCs and other resources that are around the country. The vision for this is that the federal government would in fact subsidize and pay for all of the services on this platform, so that you as entrepreneurs can not only find the grants that you need, but get the support you need and have it actually paid for by the federal government, so that's not coming out of your pocket, ultimately making this whole space much more accessible. So that's what we're working towards. In the meantime, I want to take you on a journey of just what grants are, why they exist, and how to be super successful in getting them, and talk a little bit about maybe some of the pitfalls and experiences that we've had along the way. And I'll go through this pretty quickly and then kind of open it up for questions. But I think you probably all know what grants are. They're non-dilutive and they don't require any repayment. And they might come from foundations, they come from the federal government, they come from state governments. And not only that, but you can actually stack them all together. And so, frequently, the program that everyone knows about, SBIR, depending on the state you're in, you can actually get SBIR funding from the federal government and then matching SBIR funding from your state government. You might even be able to get SBIR funding from your local government. And all of a sudden you're looking at $500,000 as a seed round into your startup for no equity. So it's an incredible opportunity, but it's massively underutilized. And the reason for that is that it's kind of difficult to navigate. The reporting can be a bit onerous, and a lot of people just don't know that it exists and is available to them. And so that's one of the reasons we built Open Grants, as I mentioned, but it's also something that I think a lot of founders get sold this vision and for lack of a better word, what you might call startup porn, which is just this oh, we're going to get this Series B and then we're going to get this Series C, and it's just venture capital all the way. And the fact is there's so many ways to use capital and so many vehicles for capital out there and tools. And when you get really strategic about being a founder and get really strategic with your capital stack, you start to realize that, oh yeah, maybe for our research money, we should use grants. And maybe for, this building, we should use some kind of hard money loan. And maybe, the VC money is just for growth or whatever. There's a lot of different products out there. It's one of the really exciting things about building a startup, especially right now. There's so many different options of non-dilutive capital. And that could be revenue-based financing that's non-dilutive. It can be a lot of other kinds of debt. And grant funding in particular is the one I'm passionate about, just because it is so altruistic and so underutilized. And so grants represent a lot more than just money. They're validation. They're a proof point for your investors and for your customers they're a sale, they're also a relationship. You could go get a grant from the EPA, and then all of a sudden that turns into contracts. A lot of federal agencies, in fact, use grant funding as a way to get around their really garbage procurement processes. It tightens up that procurement cycle a whole lot. And so they might use a grant as a way to get a company or product in and like work towards procurement post-grant award. So there's huge opportunities in the grant space. There are a lot more than just the money. They're that relationship. There's a lot of value add to the grant process. So just like high level, where you can find grants and start to learn about them. Open Grants, of course, selfishly is a great, I think is the best resource. But there's also grants.gov. There's the SBIR and STTR. There's SBIR.gov. There's other companies like Instrumental and GrantStation that do grant aggregation as well. And then there's the official government portals, including BetaSam. California has its own grants.gov portal, and other states have their own, specific portals for grant funding. And so I always throw this out there. The other place that I would look and talk, to people in your circle about, and especially given your affiliation with a university, talk to your mentors. Like universities live on grant funding, if you didn't know that. So talk to your mentors, talk to people you work with. They might be aware of grant programs that are out there that aren't necessarily like what you might commonly understand as a grant program, because there's different funding programs out there. There's competitive grants, which are like RFPs where you're applying and competing against other people. But then there's just grants that are just given, basically. You just fill out the paperwork, show up, and they give you funding. And those kinds of programs are usually like first come, first serve kind of programs. And they're targeted towards specific industries and supporting very specific activities. But they can be massively useful, especially if you're doing some kind of like hard tech or economic development kind of focused program. So lots of different opportunities out there. I'd say first line of defense is talk to people in your network who might know. Second thing I would really suggest doing is talk to an expert in the grant funding area in your industry, and whether that's like a consultant that you might find on the Open Grants platform or someone find that person, talk to them, because they can take you from like 0 to 10 real quickly as a founder, and it's a big competitive advantage. So highly suggest that. So that's where you can find grants. And I just want to touch on like the process for being successful in winning grant funding. And this is really the two things that set companies who win apart from companies who don't get funded. And the first one's super basic, and that is follow the rules. So with any grant funding opportunity that's out there, you're going to find that there's a bunch of rules for applying for the funding. Whether that's, hey, I want you to fill out this form. Sometimes it's really basic. Fill out this form and you fill in the boxes and you're good to go. And sometimes it's much more complex. It's like 80 pages and it's usually called an RFP or a GFO or whatever. It's this big document, and it says everything from like, hey, we want you to address these points, to we need you to like use 14-point font and have like 5 centimeter gutters or whatever. Like they get really specific with these really odd things. It's insane. And so, it's important that you follow the rules, but it's also, just so you know, that just puts you on an even footing with everyone else. Like everyone either follows the rules or doesn't. And they either disqualify you because you didn't follow the rules, or you follow the rules. And that puts you, if you do the job correctly, it puts you on the same level as everyone else who followed the rules. So the real opportunity is not about following the rules. This is just important and sometimes harder to do than you think it is, but this puts you on the same level as everyone else. If you really want to be competitive, it's about being a good partner. And this really goes into everything that you may have already discussed about raising capital in general. And that means that being a good partner, first and foremost, starts with figuring out who your partners are. So one of the biggest mistakes, and it was mentioned that maybe I should talk about this. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen companies make, and that I also made myself, is being good at telling a story. So you go out and you find a grantor who maybe doesn't quite match your mission. Maybe they're not like a great fit, but you just want their money. And so you tell a story and you say, hey, look, we can kind of do this, and you end up getting funded, and it's the worst thing in the world. I remember getting the money. It was about $500,000, and like a couple years into the contract, just being like, just regretting it so much, just being deeply sad. about having that money and that relationship in place, because all of a sudden we had to do a bunch of stuff that our company really wasn't set up to do, and it wasn't on our roadmap, and we had to do it because we had to get rid of this contract and satisfy this agreement. So being a good partner first starts with doing your research and figuring out like who's aligned with what you're trying to achieve in the market and who's driving that forward. And it could be foundations, it could be federal agencies, it could be state agencies, but figure out like who it is that is doing the thing that you want to accomplish, or that is like trying to fund the thing that you want to accomplish. And I promise you that there's somebody doing it. Like, just, don't worry about it. It's much less about finding like eventually you'll find the person, is what I'm saying. Like, you don't worry about like, oh, there's no one out there for me. If you're doing something that's interesting and impactful or innovative or research focused, I will say, like, grant funding typically isn't going to like fund a dating app. Like, some of these kinds of ideas just aren't like super relevant, but I've seen grant funding used to do everything from like fund a video game about terraforming Mars to build research like the next generation of cancer therapies and interventions. So it's a huge space, and there's all kinds of people who are very interested in achieving a lot of different things in the world, and there's a lot of money out there. So find that person or persons or agencies who are aligned with your goals. And then the first part of this is like, you want to do your research. You obviously want to follow the rules, but you want to like show up and give value before you ask them for money. So this is a lot like a sales process. You don't want to cold call a grantor and ask them for $1 million or $500,000 or $250,000. It just doesn't work that way. You want to build a relationship, and in particular for public agencies, which are, give the biggest and kind of most robust grants. So you're talking about $100K, $250,000, $500,000, $90 million. These are the kinds of grants that you need if you're really doing kind of world-changing work. And you don't want to just like show up and ask them for money, because they're not going to give it to you. Your chances are very low. So, especially with public agencies, there's meetings, there's all kinds of opportunities to show up and provide value ahead of your ask. And what that helps you do is not only like, be there and be present and, establish brand recognition basically, but it also helps you shape how the agency, in particular in the public sector, this is very true. You want to start to shape their worldview of your space, of whatever your sector is. And the reason that you want to do that is because all of the information they collect from those public meetings, and they'll solicit public comments from the industry. And if you're there providing that information, it's literally what drives the requirements and the description of the grant that they're going to deploy. And so if you've shaped that process, then you in turn, when you apply, will receive the money, or you'll be very likely to receive the money. So this is a really important thing to understand. You want to do it for foundations and other groups as well, because, and you may have seen this, there's a lot of foundations that do basically like invite only grants. And the only way that they're going to know to invite you is if you've showed up, if you're part of the community, if you're being authentic about whatever you're trying to achieve, whether it is researching cancer interventions or building like a really cool game or helping the homeless, whatever it is, you need to be authentic, be very real, show up, be part of that community. So that's a big part of being this like successful awardee of grant funding. And it really does like translate into actual dollars at the end of the day. So it's a great way to learn, be authentic, help shape the community that you're already trying to operate in. And, upshot is you also get funded, which is cool. So being a good partner at the beginning, then during the award, you obviously want to be clear about what's happening, what's working, what's not. So you're going to get awarded funding, and then there's like, they expect you to do something with it. And there's usually some kind of reporting requirements, and you want to be, just like you are, and just like you would be with investors, you want to be open. You want to be super transparent. Like, I actually lost $250,000 from a grant one time, like that, not good. And so you want to be transparent, because things are going to happen. Bad stuff happens. You're going to want to like navigate those situations with that person who's managing that contract. And so you want to have a good relationship with them. And then post award, and also during the award, there's going to be so many opportunities for you to leverage that relationship, whether it's the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation or the Department of Defense or the NIH, NSF. All of these groups, they love having their name out there associated with really cool, legit things. And guess what? chances are their like social media presence and clout with the press and everything else is a lot better than yours. So, leverage that relationship. That's part of being a good partner. They love the fact that you're highlighting them, and they'll go to bat for you with their press connections, with their email lists, with their social media press. So it's a great, like, very mutually beneficial opportunity to just really take advantage of that relationship that you've developed. And then post award, frequently if you got an award and a grant from an agency, they might want to give you another one. So you just want to like execute with authenticity and honesty. Don't do anything sketchy, and chances are they'll give you more money, which is cool. So that's the process. I'm happy to dive into a little bit more of like tactical things about applying for grants and other stuff, but I'm also happy to just take some questions now, and we can kind of open it up for discussion. And if that lulls, I can tell you stories about getting grant funding and how great it is.
Awesome, thank you. So folks, if you have any questions, please raise your hands and we'll call on you. And Kelly's first out, and then we'll go to DJ.
Hey, thank you. That was awesome. A quick question. I mean, I think the complexity for me and the folks I know is not once you get into the process, it's where do you go to get in the process? And you've named a whole bunch of different areas you can get your grants. If I'm hypothetically in a diversity inclusion app, and I'm hypothetically Susan, and I'm hypothetically going after the construction industry, how would I navigate that to try to find out where do I go? To how do I start that process to find the grant that's best for me? There's so many of them out there. It's like you walk into a forest to find a single tree. So,
yeah. So typically what we do is pretty similar to how you might pursue investors, frankly, is we'll start by doing something that we call blueprinting or building a roadmap, which is to say that we'll look at the entire ecosystem of people who are interested in DEI work in that space, and build a funnel, and then we'll just start to look at all those programs. We usually takes maybe like 2 to 3 weeks. Typically, you'll find consultants who do this as a service. You can also do it yourself, of course. And we'll build what we call a grant funding strategy. We try to be super intentional about that for a couple of reasons. One is, like I said, you don't want to cold call these people. So you don't want to like find a grant that is due in 10 days and try to apply for it. Like you might, that's a whole different, like maybe one-off opportunity. But what you want to do is build that pipeline, understand that, oh, like in 8 months, there's this grant coming out. Let's start engaging and be part of this process. And so that's what, I would start by that like ecosystem, like high level rundown, build that funnel, figure out what you're really going to be eligible and competitive for. And answering that question, like, all right, where am I going to win? Really hinges on a few things. One is how competitive is the process, right? Like how many applications are I looking at? And am I one of like 100 or am I one of 10,000? And how much money is available? And what size award is going to be given. And then you can kind of do the math and figure out how competitive it's going to be. One of the best ways to also figure out how competitive and like whether or not you're a good fit is to ask the people. I think people forget this, or maybe they just don't realize it or think that there's maybe a rule about it. Like you figure out who the program person is who's deciding who's getting the money, and you ask them, like, are we a good fit? Are you interested in funding this? And they might, depending on like the time frame and if they've issued the thing or not yet, they might be able to give you very specific feedback, or they might be able to give you super vague feedback. But for any programs with past performance, you can also look at who's been awarded in the past and see, how much you kind of fit the bill. But yeah, you want to start that dialogue as early as possible. You want to first build the funnel, figure out who those program people are, start that dialogue as early as possible, and go from there. And you can do this kind of like work on your own as a entrepreneur and like, just slog through, or you can get a consultant who can do it a lot faster probably. And that's just one of those decisions you have to make. Like, am I going to do the design myself, or am I going to do hire it out? But yeah, that's, the way to get started for sure is build that funnel.
And a quick follow-up, I'm sorry, everybody else. How do you, are these grants normally available year after year after year to the same person, or is it a one and done type situation? Can you continually, be funded by the same organization, for example?
It really depends. There's some foundations that are like annual funders of the same thing over and over again. And like people there's nonprofits that basically live off that kind of relationship. A lot of funding for startups in particular is more progressive and has an exit point. Like there's a focus on commercialization of a technology or a service.
Thanks, Kelly. DJ, and then we'll go to Victor.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. My question is, like you mentioned, we could also use you as a consultant, right? So what is that business model in terms of leveraging you as a consultant, where you kind of doing that work, telling us to apply for these grants, and then as we kind of get the grants, is there a percentage of a fee that you take? How does that work? And then where does your engagement start and where does your engagement end?
Totally, great question. So to be clear, I personally don't do this anymore, but a consultant in this space, generally, if you're working with a good one, they're just going to charge fee for services, and they're going to provide service as long as you need it, which might mean, they may identify for you that you need grant management post-award. And so they may provide that, and they might even identify that you need like audit management post-award, and you might need like a whole package. They also might say, look, I'm just going to help you handle the application. I'm going to put it in and I'm out. But you want to stay away generally from people who charge a percentage of the amount awarded. There's a reason for that. There's a bunch of reasons. Generally speaking, it's considered fairly unethical, and there's actually rules in most grants about doing it in the first place. But if you have a consultant who's like, I'm going to do work on a percentage, like success fee, frequently these consultants are kind of working on sort of like, they're just kind of rolling the dice. So they're doing as many applications as they can. They're not focused, and they're just kind of getting stuff in and seeing what sticks, which is not great for you in terms of your odds of winning.
Yeah, but then what would your recommendation be? Sorry.
I mean, I would find a consultant. You can go on Open Grants. You can go on. I'm going to tell you go on Open Grants, but you could go anywhere. I would find yourself a consultant who will scope a project for you, give you basically like a not to exceed contract that works on an hourly basis. This is like knowledge work. It's management consulting or whatever you want to call it. It's knowledge work. So it should be sort of fee for services. They bill hourly, and they turn in a really high quality deliverable for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, DJ. Victor, and then we'll go to Liz.
Yes, thank you so much for coming to talk to us tonight. I wanted to go down the road a little bit on the question of work product and ownership of work product that's developed under a grant. Are there any guidelines, like is it always negotiable? Are government grants never negotiable and the government owns the work product? What are some of the dynamics and even experiences that you've had in that subject?
Yeah, my advice is to tell you, one, that I'm not an attorney, and two, that you should have your attorney review any contract you have with the government. I wish there was a better answer, but it is widely variable. I've worked with agencies in California that tried to put in walk-in rights to IP. There's other programs that are, really ironclad around who owns the IP, SBIR being one of the like big famous ones that most people know about. So it depends. You want to have your attorney review your contract, and that's your jumping off point. Unfortunately, there's like almost no standardization at this point of the space.
Fair enough. So would it be also a fair question to ask of a consultant in this area to only select grants for application where work product is owned by the grantee and not the grantor, or is that kind of filtering not really available?
No, you could certainly, generally speaking, that filtering is available. A lot of it is kind of anecdotal though, because the government does whatever they want with their contracts. And so, yeah, there might be some general understanding of like, oh, this program's really friendly to startups, this program's not so much. And that certainly exists in the industry. But I would, once again, I wouldn't just ask your consultant. I would have an attorney review your contract in any case. Yeah.
Yeah, and that answer speaks volumes to the subject. I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
it in my way of thinking, the word flips right back to it is diluting if those other elements are in the contracts.
Certainly, yes. One thing I will say, just to like, don't want to scare people off. I think these programs are great. In my work as a CEO and founder of a startup, in fact, I signed a contract that had walk-in rights to our IP with a state agency once. And our attorneys looked at it and said, look, this agency is never going to enforce this. They have no mechanisms to do anything with it. And it's basically like a toothless, clause that you don't have to worry about. Yeah, get an attorney to look at it. That's the short story there.
Fair enough. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Liz, and then Donna.
Hi, Sedale. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. My question is the following. So if I'm going to start a for-profit, but I don't want, let me put it this way. So I work for the federal government, but I don't want funding from them. What other option do I have?
I mean, there's a ton of state grants. There's foundations. There's also obviously just other non-dilutive debt, basically. So I didn't touch on this much because, I love grants, but there's a ton of great products out there. I mean, everything from Stripe Capital, right? So if you use Stripe as your payment processor, Stripe just looks at all the money coming into your account and says, hey, you want 100 grand? Here you go. And it's in your account in like 3 days. So that those kinds of products exist out there. You can trade on revenue. There's contract financing as well. There's contract factoring. There's a lot of products out there. So lots of different options. You don't have to take money from the federal government, although they do have deep pockets.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Liz. Donna, and then we'll go to Roland.
I think they're both two quick questions. So I actually had someone just approach me through someone else which I kind of like this because I know there's tons of grants out there and I haven't had a chance to look. And so the grant person comes to me, you get this grant from the federal government. This is Canada, by the way. And it's, you got to come up with, they'll pay 90%. But the thing is that they're coming at us and we got to hire them. Have you seen that situation? And does that, they are approved by the federal government as someone they can dish out the money to? Does much of that stuff happen, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, and this is something we struggled with, and I can tell you fun stories about this. I will say there are a lot of scammers who have that kind of vibe and pitch to them, but there's also legitimate orgs, and this is a problem in the space for sure. It sounds like what you're saying maybe is that, were they saying they would pay 90% of the grant?
No, so that they will help me apply, and the grant will be up to 90% of whatever agreement we get in to get a digital adoption plan. And so I would have to come up with, the 10%. But the point is they are approved as one of the people that the grants can go to. So I'm going to end up hiring them.
Oh, got it. I mean, that happens in some cases, I suppose. I would double check on that and probably call the agency. But yeah, I mean, there's federally funded and designated like the iBank system, and there's programs through the Treasury that offer things like that. I don't know. I would double check with the agency. I would call them and make sure that person's legit.
Yeah. And then the second question is a hypothetical. What if you're in Canada? So with what you've got, do you got a lot of international people applying, or tell me a little bit more about your platform and how it might apply to me?
Totally, yeah. So we actually had lots of Canadian folks come through during the pandemic because Canada diverted a lot of funding to COVID, and it didn't go to entrepreneurs as plentifully as it used to. Lots of subcontracting happens in that space. So federal grants typically need to be allocated to companies that are 51% owned by a US entity or citizen. And there's also the work has to be done mostly in the United States. But we had lots of companies come through and partner with universities and other groups where they would be a subcontractor. They would do the work here in the United States, the funding would still go to them, but they would work through another party who was partnering on the project.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks, Donna. Okay, so Roland, do you have another question?
Maybe not, but I would like to, if we come with more questions, can I reach out to you, Sedale?
Yeah, totally.
You got to think fast, Roland. We're cold calling you. Somebody already answered your question. Donna does that. Roland, thanks. And Susan, and then we'll go to Anu.
Yeah, so this is terrific. Gosh, just so wonderful. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, you know, most of the accelerators that have significant money, you have to have a product. Sometimes you have to have revenue. What is what are the gates to getting money from grants? What do you have to have done in order to be eligible? That's my first question.
Sure. I will say it depends a lot, but I'll speak to like the innovation programs for startups, in particular the SBIR program. So SBIR varies from agency to agency, but generally speaking, the first tranche of funding is for like validation of your idea. So they're looking for super early kind of deeply technically challenging ideas. They are not interested and don't really care that much about revenue. Some agencies, however, like so NSF is a really interesting one. They're very much like, they think like a VC, but they're the government. So NSF's SBIR program, very much like VC driven. So they want to see a super strong team. If you've got like Harvard and Stanford and like some like PhDs on your proposal, they're like really excited about it. That's like, they're very much that way. You go over to the DoD and they're just super interested in like you figuring out their many problems. They put out proposals that are like, hey, solve this problem for us and we'll give you a bunch of money. So it really depends on who you're talking to and what agency, but a lot of it has to do with like, there's a tranche of funding for early ideas, and then there's a follow-on amount once you've validated that for building and commercialization.
Cool, great. And then my second one is going back to consultants, having been one myself in various parts of my career. Are these consultants aware of like startups, early stage startups are very lean, right? We're starving and we're trying to make a lot of money, you know, a little money go a long way. So how's the pricing with these consultants?
Yeah, it does depend. Most of them are super or at least fairly accessible. A lot of times they make a lot of money on kind of like a hub and spoke model. So something you'll find is like a consultant who's working on a DoD project might be, you know, encouraging you to also partner with Raytheon or someone else on like some deployment or something along those lines. And so they may be making money that way as well. But yeah, I would say a lot of times you're looking at anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 to go after $250,000 in grant funding. And if you've got a good consultant who you're paying like fee for services, they're also going to tell you no if you're not a good fit. And this is one of the other things I think is just so damaging about people who work on like this success fee, is they give this really terrible experience to entrepreneurs because they say yes to garbage. They say yes to bad ideas all the time because they're just filling the pipeline. And so working with an agency or group, and it's something we curate for deeply at Open Grants, working for people who are going to tell you no, because they have that 99.9% success rate. They're always winning and they don't take bad projects. Those are like the people you want to find. You want to find someone who's going to tell you no quickly. So that's an important part of that consultant kind of relationship that you want to look for.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Anu, and then we'll go to Adolfo.
Susan, you're done?
Yep, you're up, Anu. All yours.
Yeah. So thank you, Sedale. This is fascinating. So you said you have done multiple startups where you able to secure these grants for yourself, and it would be interesting to know some of the startups that you have helped secure grants. How large were they? What kind of startups did you help out? Just so that it will give us an idea of how we can think about things we are working on.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll give you a couple examples that I think are really useful. One is grants are super specific. So you don't want to just like try to get a grant for operating capital for your startup. You want to come to an agency and say, hey, we want to integrate alternative fuels and advanced vehicle tech across the state of California for enterprise fleets who are looking to buy, you know, new kinds of vehicles and new kinds of vehicle technology. So we got $500,000, my first startup, we got $500,000 from the state of California in a grant to do that. And there's a lot of other things going on at your startup. You're doing R&D, you're building tech. We, in this case, were building a SaaS platform, and we got $500,000 to effectively do customer discovery across the entire state. So that's just like a really specific example of like, that's one of the grants we got. And the reason we got it is because we got very specific, and we looked at our capital stack and we said, look, here's this one thing that we know that we need a good amount of money for, and we don't want to pay for it, of course. We want to find someone else who can like put the bill for this thing, because we're a startup and we don't have very much money. And so that was one way we tackled it. There's other companies, we have them kind of listed on I think on the front page of Open Grants, but another one that I think is really cool, we helped a company called EV Life, who was developing a new way of leasing electric vehicles and advancing the tax credits from electric vehicles. We helped them get $250,000 to build out like their MVP. They were then able to leverage that into like getting a follow-on grant to help them continue to expand their operation. We supported a company called Starfish Space with an SBIR. They were able to use that as the basis to raise their Series A. So there's a lot of different ways to go after this space. And the big takeaway that I'd say is you want to get real specific, right? So you want to think about like, all right, what do I need money for? What can I get really strategic about? And then who's going to fund that?
So for the 250K grant that they got, did they have to spend like 25K, 50K? Just out of curiosity.
This is a super unique program. They basically spent an hour with one of our team members to get that done. So I think they paid maybe like $100. So, but that's a perfect example. Like, who knew that program existed? Well, we did, and then we connected them to it, and then they were able to take advantage of it. So, like I said, there's some programs that's just filling out a form. That happened to be one of them.
Awesome, great, thank you very much. Yeah, this is super interesting.
Of course.
Thanks, Anu. Adolfo, and then we'll go to Manian.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for joining us. And in my case, this is extremely well timed. I was looking at the NASA grant this morning, and I have a specific question about consultants. Some agencies have a way of thinking, as you were saying, a way of operating, and a way of viewing the world. Do you suggest that you find a specific consultant with experience with a specific agent, or it doesn't matter, or a consultant so skilled that they can work with any agency in any space? Or do you have any suggestions as to how to vet, how to review the consultants you may engage?
Yeah, I would suggest finding, and this is one of the things that made us successful at Momentum prior to Open Grants, and the way we've organized our marketplace on Open Grants reflects this as well. Find someone who knows the agency, because as I've mentioned a few times, there's zero standardization. Some agencies don't even like you to work with consultants. NSF, SBIR, they don't like it that you have a consultant. They don't like, they frown on it a little bit. NASA, on the other hand, probably find someone who knows NASA because there's nuances and different things that they want. And then the other thing about this is you're looking to align your incentives with this agency. And so having a consultant who's done a lot of work with that agency will help you, they will help you understand what the agency's thinking, what their motivations are, and how they're looking at investment in companies, because that's kind of how they see it, is like, look, we're investing in a company for X reasons, even though it's non-dilutive. So definitely get someone who knows the agency and ask them, like, what have you done with this agency? Can you help, can you connect me with people that you've helped navigate this agency, that kind of thing. The other big bonus is that they'll frequently have like templated out how to address the agency's process. So they won't have to spend a lot of time doing discovery, and like they won't have to spend a bunch of time learning the agency to then help you. They'll just be able to go from day one.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Adolfo. Manian, if there's anybody else, before we go to Manian, if anybody else has any questions, please raise your hands, and then we'll end it after Manian then.
Hey, Sedale, thanks for the opportunity educating us. It's really interesting to see how the platform evolved and with the features. I have two set of questions. One is, how does institutional grants differ from the government grants and other grants in the grant management side of it? And my other question is, do you have a working model for a nonprofit organization to help through grants management? Every grant is unique and different. Funding comes at a later point in time. Funding comes as they show progress. Funding comes upfront. There are different ways to leverage grants in an organization, for example, in a nonprofit. How do you suggest handling those kind of two different aspects?
Yeah, so on the first question, like institutional grants, and I think maybe you're talking about foundations or corporates, the one thing you do want to be aware of is they frequently are only giving grants, except for in some cases, to nonprofit orgs. And it's just because of taxes. So you can like partner up with a nonprofit and be a subcontractor if you don't happen to be a nonprofit yourself. And that can be a really great way for you to engage as well, because then you don't have to do all the admin work that you're talking about. On the administration side, kind of grants management, we do have a tool actually within the Open Grants platform. It's a partner company of ours, and I should say they're a friend company. They're not like a partner officially. They're friends of ours called Atlas Solutions. That's a great grants management platform. But generally speaking, if you don't know, like the agency or institution will tell you what they expect in terms of like managing the solicitation, and they'll have a bunch of requirements. And you need to like dive in and make sure you're doing this. So just as a point here, about 70% of companies fail their audits with a federal agency that's given a grant. It's a crazy big number, and it doesn't mean that like they're getting in trouble necessarily. They're maybe getting their hands slapped, but like you're going to get audited at some point, especially if you get multiple grants. So you want to pass that, because it's just a bother to like have to go out and fix a bunch of stuff. So you want to read carefully. Sometimes they have a lot of requirements, like you need to do employee time tracking for everyone in this project so that we know exactly what like indirect and direct costs were charged to the grant. That's a big one for startups that a lot of early stage companies just don't have, is time tracking. So this happens with foundations as well. And you just have to be aware of the requirements and follow them as closely as you can, ideally perfectly. It sometimes helps, it definitely helps to have a consultant who can do that post-award. That's what we refer to as post-award management, that grant management task. And because there's not any standardization, it is nice to have someone, kind of to Adolfo's question, if you have someone, a consultant who's familiar with the agency and knows like the post-award requirements for the agency, they might even have this all templated out, like where do you need to make your budget allocations, how you do indirect and direct costs, all that stuff. They probably have it ready to go if they're any good. And so that's a really great way to like solve for that, is get a consultant who can help you if you don't want to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, on top of the multiple grants, some can be charged to multiple grants. How do you decide which one is the right one to choose? Some government and institutional grants may fall into the same effort. Is there a way to justify why you pick and choose and apply charges to that grant?
We had a whole team at Momentum. As you imagine, a $5 billion portfolio, we had a whole team of accountants doing that all the time. I think the best way is knowing the space, hiring a consultant, hiring a good accountant who knows the space as well. I wish there was a better answer. I wish there was like a silver bullet, but there really isn't. It's complex, and you need professionals who know the space, or you could kind of do it yourself and see what happens. Like you could always roll the dice.
Awesome. Thank you for educating us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manian, and thanks for bringing people. Leo.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to escape for a second. Had a little child emergency here, but everything's fine. Apologize if I missed and you covered that already. Sedale, please, forgive me. As someone who actually sits on the grant committee, we always get various questions, and some people are more engaged, some people are less engaged. But there are two, in my experience, two forms of grants. One where you're, invited to come. It's a somewhat secluded and more close-knit group of people, and they just reach out and they look for someone to invite into the grant process. And some where you can apply directly. So I totally agree with you that following the rules and being engaged with the committee early on and kind of walking through the process with them instead of just sending out a a filled out sheet and hoping for the best. But how do you, I'm curious if you have any insight on how to reach out to the committees that are invite only. What are the techniques, or do you have any know-how to share on how that can be done for startups?
Yeah, I think, this comes back to that kind of building a relationship thing. Regardless, while it might be hard to know like exactly what communities are doing these invite only things, if you do a little sleuthing, you start to figure it out. And you even see like there's foundations that put it right on their website. They're like, we don't accept, like, this is invite only. We don't accept applications from anybody. We make invitations. And so when you identify a group like that, it just, you go through the same process you would use to socialize your company to a federal agency or state agency, which is to, participate in whatever way you can, maybe drip some emails their way, figure out a way to get them on your newsletter, like get a connection. And this, once again, to circle back to Adolfo, this is also a crux thing that consultants can do, right? Is if they work with the Schmidt Foundation all the time, or if they work with the Gates Foundation, or whoever, they can hook you up with those connections and relationships a little more efficiently. But I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of relationship-driven things in this space. There's a lot of pounding the pavement that goes into it. And so, to bring this around full circle, you want to be sure like this is the direction you want to go. Once you've identified it, it's a great path, and it's huge, can be a massive kind of strategic benefit for your company. But at the same time, you can spend a lot of time in this space and spin your wheels pretty good. So you want to be clear about what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do it. So definitely, like, it helps to be intentional. Like I mentioned earlier, build that funnel, figure out who you need to connect with, and then engage in some kind of campaign to educate and like win basically win their attention.
Thanks, Leo. So, any other questions? Oh, Adolfo.
Yeah. Do you mind saying a little bit more about this concept of building a funnel? I think it's a very important idea because I heard you a couple of times, but I'm not sure I'm grasping it. So any clarification will be appreciated.
Sure. So I'm going to use Open Grants as a reference here just because I think it's the best tool for doing this. But you could do this in Google, you could do it in grants.gov, wherever. You want to start from like first principles of like who's interested in funding what I'm doing. So if you're working, say you're a library building like a really cool exhibit around genealogy of a local tribe or something, you're like, all right, where does this fit? This is sort of like a digital humanities project. Maybe that's what you're doing. So you go into Open Grants, you search for digital humanities. You're going to get, maybe 100 results for digital humanities. You might get more, you might get less. So as you look at that digital humanities list of grants, you're like, all right, well, these two are past due. These two are due in like 2 weeks. And here's 10 that are like, over the next few months, this is money that's interesting. Oh, by the way, I need at least $500,000. So let's discard like all the ones that don't have $500,000. So now you've got you've gone from a big like list to hopefully like 20 or 30 or less ideally. And then you figure out some more things like, all right, well, these 3 are only for, people in Colorado or whatever. Like, you start to narrow it down. And so by like a means of elimination, you figure out, all right, well, here's 5 over the next year that will pull in the right amount of funding that I need. And here's, and then you can go drill down even more and like figure out, all right, who are the program officers? Let me call each one of these people and figure out if our project is a good fit. And maybe 2 of them are like super enthusiastic and a couple are just like meh, and maybe one of them's like, don't apply here, it's a waste of time. And so there you've got your funnel. So that's kind of the process. Is you want to start with like the universe of possibilities, do a little elimination based on whatever criteria you're setting for yourself, and then really drill down to like find the ones where you're going to be competitive. And a lot of that, as I mentioned earlier, is just asking them, saying, look, how many people apply? What's, how much money is there? And do the math and figure out if it's a good opportunity for you. And also if there's interest from them in funding what you're doing, of course. So that's the funnel process.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Very helpful.
Thanks, Adolfo. Susan.
Yeah, So if there's no more questions, Sedale, we wanted to say just thank you. This is great. Wonderful. It's a whole nother avenue for a bunch of us to explore. Can we reach out to you if we have more questions as well? And also we'll encourage everybody to sign up to open grants as well. Are you okay if we keep a dialogue going with you?
Yeah, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and yeah, reach out for sure. Definitely hit up the team at Open Grants as well. They're a wealth of knowledge. We also, just so you know, it's free to sign up, and we just launched a new feature where you can just publish your project to our community of experts, and they'll give you all kinds of feedback. They'll also send you proposals, of course, which you're not under any obligation to hire them, but they give you feedback and thoughts about like maybe grants that are a good fit. So encourage you all, if this seems like something you want to go down and you want to figure out, pretty quickly what if it's a good path, post a project up and get the feedback you need, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You'll know one way or another.
Oh, that's so great. That was going to be one of my questions is there a way to kind of, winnow it down a bit? And so that's a really good way from the experts. That's perfect. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was terrific, and yeah, very fun.
Yes,
my pleasure.
Thank you, Sedale. This was really incredible. And also thank you, Lucas and
Yes.
Bill Mitchell. Thank you both. Bill, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to be here. Sedale was a drawing card for me tonight, but all good.
Also, Allison Byers from Scroobius says hi. She wanted to be here, but she's apparently in London. So, Allison, we love you.
She is one of our favorite investors, by the way.
Oh, good. Okay.
So excited that she's on our cap table.
Nice. Perfect. That woman is incredible. So,
So
go ahead, Susan.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I had one more announcement related to Allison, but you go ahead. Oh, okay. So she's having a Perfect Your Pitch webinar coming up on August 17th. So if you go into Scroobius, I can forward it to everybody. I've gotten an email on it, but she's awesome. If you haven't experienced her other than kind of in our group, she's just awesome. And I think the webinar is going to be really cool, and it's free, and you don't have to be a member of Scroobius to attend. So we'll put it into the entrepreneur channel, that webinar.
Awesome. Thanks. So folks, I'm going to end the recording. Please stick around for a quick poll, some overtime. And lastly, next week, Testing Business Ideas Workshop number 2. So if you want to learn how to actually validate and test your idea and move forward and make progress, please come and join us next week. Thank you all for coming, and have a great night.